Police officers of Reddit, what's the creepiest disappearance case you've ever been assigned to? Not a police officer, but my granddad was. He was a part of the police force in the 60s till the early 80s. Sometime during the 70s he was assigned to a missing persons case that had been ongoing for a while and had actually been reassigned due to the lack of new evidence. Him and his partner spent months on the case fighting for it to stay open. One day they went and searched the missing person's home again. It caused a lot of uproar with the family as they hadn't really moved his things or been into his home since the case had gone quiet. Anyway, they got permission almost a month after asking and found a handwritten receipt for a car in his bathroom bin. God knows why his bins weren't searched before, unless it was just missed. They managed to track down the guy who sold him the car. He said that the missing person had mentioned that he was going to store his car in a garage till he had the money to insure it. He even gave them the name of the town he said the garages were in. They went to the town and got search warrants for every single rentable garage, even though they had no evidence he had ever rented one. After a couple of days they found the car with the guy inside it. Apparently, his body was almost mummified because of the lack of sun, air, and moisture. I can't imagine what the smell was like, but they think he accidentally killed himself while trying to do some work on the car. He would have had the garage door closed because his car wasn't insured. He didn't want anyone to see the car and steal it. It was stored in a rough neighborhood where the garages were cheap to rent. He also paid cash in hand, so he never had any receipts. So yeah, he died of carbon monoxide poisoning. It's painless and basically you just fall asleep and then you die. He wouldn't have realized until it was too late. The guy was missing for 5 months and he seemed to just disappear for no known reason. My granddad told me this when I was a kid and it really scared me that people can so easily just go missing or die and nobody knows where they are. Still kinda freaks me out. There was a case around here a few years back where a woman's body was found in a chest freezer in a storage unit 30 years after she disappeared. She was a 50-something woman who never came home from her third date with a guy. Foul play was immediately suspected. This was a woman who'd never missed a day of work and spoke with her adult daughter every day. In fact, she'd promised to call her daughter when she got home from her date. Obviously, the guy was a prime suspect. He told the cops that he got angry with the woman when she wouldn't have sex with him after he bought her 3 dinners. He claimed he'd kicked her out of the car in front of a seedy motel in the worst part of a very sketchy town. And I'll add that this happened during the height of the 80s crack epidemic, before cell phones, when security cameras were a rarity. The crazy part is that the guy successfully diverted suspicion with raging misogyny. He made it very clear that he hated all women and that this woman deserved to die because she wasn't gonna provide him with the one thing women were good for. His hatred was so sincere that it made his claim of innocence seem equally sincere. Like, yes, I treat all women like garbage because they all deserve it. They all deserve to die. But I'm not about to kill any of them because none of them are worth spending life in prison. Cops interviewed him repeatedly and searched his home. The guy kept screaming about what he was going to do to the woman when they found her because she was ruining his life. Eventually the case went cold. The guy lived into his 80s. After he died, peacefully, in his sleep, his kids got a letter from a storage facility letting them know that the rent was overdue. The guy had always paid cash in person and had only left them a PO box address attached to a slightly different version of his name. The kids went to clean out the unit and found her body. Not a cop, but I track missing persons accounts for a bank in coordination with the police. One day a cop called and said they wanted to track the accounts of a woman who had gone missing at the hands of a dangerous trafficker. The last transactions I could trace since she disappeared were at one of our branches. I pulled the footage and the trafficker was pulling a bunch of money from her account. I received an alert the next day from the account stating that a purchase was made. The purchase was from a hardware store. Shortly after, the next purchase was for a carpet cleaner rental. Needless to say, cops contacted us and say they suspect he killed her, but they couldn't locate a body. Felt like I had witnessed a murder through simple financial transactions. Drug trafficker or human trafficker? Human trafficking scares the shit out of me. Imagine one day you're living life on your way to work, or the supermarket or something, and the next you're tied up in the back of a van, or shopping container heading to God knows where to do God knows what. Human. But I have about 10 years of experience working with assisting sex trafficking victims with a victim service organization. Not sure where you live, but I live in Canada and it's extremely rare to just be taken off the street like that. Most of the circumstances are vulnerable women, and some men, who are romanticized and forced into the sex trade, or promised false terms of work, nannying, housemaid etc., and then forced into the sex industry. Financial vulnerability and a lack of awareness are the two biggest risk factors. My grandfather was a policeman and a fireman at different points in his life. His spooky disappearance story actually came from his time as a fireman. He hasn't told me the story in a long while, so I'm a little fuzzy in the details, but here goes. His team gets called to a house fire in a small village, rural England. It's late at night. The fire is reported by a local who was walking home. Several other bystanders have arrived by the time the fire engine gets there, and there are multiple reports of screams for help from inside the building. They start to douse the fire and 3 of the responders, including my granddad, enter the building via the back door to attempt to rescue the people trapped inside. The thing is, they don't find a soul. Nobody is there. They clear the whole place out, stop the fire, effectively make the building safe. Later on, it's confirmed that the fire started in the kitchen, likely the hob, where food was midway through being prepared. As far as anyone knew, the couple who lived there had been at home. Relatives had no idea where they might have gone that night. My granddad and his colleagues have a funny feeling, so they get local police properly involved. Crime scene investigation uncovered blood on the floor in one room, but any other evidence was destroyed in the fire. They can't confirm who the blood belongs to. It apparently didn't match the blood types of the 2 vanished residents. The fire department are very suspicious at this point, and apparently the police want to drop the investigation in favor of a manhunt for the missing people, but they end up expanding the investigation radius and find that apparently an unidentified van was parked outside the house that left just before the fire was reported. The investigation goes dead, but over a year later they find the burned remains of the man who lived there in a grave in the woods several towns away. They never found the woman, so it was suspected that she killed him and burned down the house to conceal it. They never figured out where the screams from inside the building were coming from, though. My grandfather was a sheriff on the West Coast in the 70s. I don't know a lot of details because he never talked about it, but I know he was part of a team who recovered multiple sets of remains that turned out to be Ted Bundy victims. Apparently it was the most graphic thing he's ever seen. My mom was approached by Ted Bundy when she was younger. He asked for directions and wanted her to come show him on a map at his car. She said, "I'm not from around here, but my grandma is," and as soon as he saw grandma he took off. He was driving his VW and wearing a cast. Very scary to think about. So scary. My grandfather practically locked my mom and my aunt in the house for months after he saw the bodies. They didn't figure out until way later that it was actually Ted Bundy's doing. Did you watch the documentary on Netflix? Horrifying and fascinating at the same time. He's one of the main reasons for databases that all law enforcement can access. Not a cop, but had a pretty effed up disappearance happen about a mile away from where I live. A girl went missing. She was 12. The whole town, state police, and I believe possibly the FBI all got involved. Search parties in the woods and through the streets for about 2 or 3 days. Turns out she had gone over to these kids' house that she knew from school to have them fix her bike. Turns out the kids, brothers, one 15 and the other 17, planned on stealing it. Well, she put up a struggle and the one brother wound up strangling her in his basement. She was found a few days after she went missing. They stuffed her body in a trash can on trash night. Garbage just disappears. How were they found out? If I recall, one of the brothers made a post on Facebook about taking out the trash. They even showed up to the vigil and messaged the family members on Facebook to pretend to show concern. One of the brothers got out of jail and immediately was a part of a home invasion. Brandon Lawson. He ran out of gas on the highway in the middle of the night and called his brother to come help him. Shortly after he called 911 and reported that someone had chased him into the woods and that he needed police. Eventually his brother and one police officer arrive at the scene and find his truck abandoned, but no sign of Brandon. Brandon calls his brother and says he's bleeding and is 10 minutes away from his truck. That was the last anyone ever heard from him, and searches of the area turned up empty.